Good evening, my darling little phantoms, and welcome back to Phantasmic, hosted by none other than yours truly, Lady Lillian McCall. Have you ever looked up at the night sky and wondered what else was out there? In all that infinitely vast expanse, surely something else is out there, right? Well, that's what I'm here to deliver tonight in my tales for you. Aliens. I've always been fascinated by the idea of life from other planets. After all, demons such as myself can exist from other dimensions. Who's to say there aren't whole civilizations somewhere out there? But that question brings with it several more. In our first story exploring the idea of extraterrestrial life, I wanted to see if we could find an answer to one of those such questions. If they exist and are capable, are they watching us? Well, there seems to be a prevailing theme around owls for the answer I was able to find. According to a little synopsis for a book called The Messengers, Owl Synchronicity and the UFO Abductee by Mike Cleland, provided by Josh Stewart, it would certainly seem that the binding similarities between a fair amount of stories is a possible screen memory. Without further ado, let me read Josh's words. Aside from the overwhelming desire to just figure out what the hell is happening with the UFO phenomenon, it's also rad to have a subject matter that can still make the hair on the back of your neck stand on end. And with all of our senses being constantly overwhelmed by technology from all angles, I find it more and more rare to really have an exciting, spooky experience these days. So, when I stumbled across a few stories that not only involved graphic and bizarre UFO encounters, but also mixed with terrifically creepy late-night experiences with owls, I was intrigued to say the least. So, I hunted down the source of these stories and was led to a new book by first-time author Mike Cleland. Mike Cleland became interested in the subject as a result of strange personal experience. An experience that, at first, seemed incredible, but didn't really sink in until he had the exact same strange experience a few days later. This all centered around a weird interaction with a group of owls. That's right, owls. This sparked Mike to start a blog about his experience, and he soon was overwhelmed with readers leaving comments about having very similar experiences to his. Eventually, Mike began investigating the issue deeper and collecting first-hand accounts of other experiences, and the stories he started to hear went beyond the bizarre and into the truly weird. A young man named Joe was driving his 4 friends home one night when he and his friend Dave, in the passenger seat, saw a brilliant blue light descending in the sky. Both Joe and Dave were speechless until after they had lost sight of it beyond the tree line. After the shock wore off, they told the 3 people in the back seats what they had just seen. They were traveling about 55 miles per hour when a white owl flew right up alongside their car with its head turned, staring directly at the passengers. This owl was flying right next to the passenger window, close enough that Dave could have reached out and touched it. The owl hovered there for about 5 seconds and then flew off. Then, less than a mile down the road, another white owl did the exact same thing. Again, staring sideways while flying right next to the car, staring in Dave's window. Suddenly, everyone in the car began screaming, as if they were all feeling the same primal fear. The types of experiences related between the pages of the messengers range from the mundane to horrifically creepy, but one thing that is for sure is that they were very real to the people who experienced them. Some of them never even realized that the incident was strange at all until they retell their story to Mike. And as Mike digs deeper and collects more and more stories, another pattern becomes strongly consistent with nearly every person he interviews. They have also had some sort of sighting or contact with UFOs or what they believe to be extraterrestrials. And a lot of these stories seem to overlap. Enough of which that Mike makes a pretty obvious conclusion that there's a connection between the two. Karina Sables was heading home with her family, driving slowly, and at a sharp bend right in the beam of headlights, They saw what she can only describe as a typical gray alien standing on the side of the road. I slammed on the brakes in the middle of the road and screamed. The children and I began to shake uncontrollably, but oddly Rob, her husband, just calmly turned to me and said, "What are you guys so worried about? It's only a big owl." One of the most consistent issues that pops up with this topic is the idea of a screen memory. The idea is that when aliens are interacting with humans, they somehow are influencing people to see something other than a scary alien being, in order to keep them calm through the experience. It seems the most common screen memory people remember after such an experience is that of seeing strange 3 to 4 foot tall owls. In an interview with the author of possibly the most famous alien abduction story ever, Communion, Whitley Strieber explained that long before he started having abduction experiences, there was a little white owl that used to stand in our backyard and watch the windows of my bedroom when I was a child. It made my folks nervous. This was during the time that they started nailing the screen shut. Something really creepy seemed to be going on here. But the further the messengers goes on, the more we discover that there are a multitude of owl experiences that are clearly not screen memories, but real, actual owls that are interacting with people. There are many people who tell stories about an owl that would follow them around town for several weeks or even months. They'd stay out in the front yard or on a light post or in a tree, and then would follow these people around town as they ran errands. Never interacting with them directly, but seemingly keeping an eye on them at all times of the day. Cleland investigates every possible theory and scenario that could help explain what is going on here, covering topics of shamanism to mythology, from the story of the Mothman to the symbolism of the owl at Bohemian Grove. It's a really extensive journey, and it's filled with endless trove of incredible stories that mostly sound far too bizarre to have been made up. I highly recommend this book to skeptics and ufology fans alike. It is endlessly entertaining, even if you don't end up believing that there's something of substance happening here. Perhaps I should close with my own little story. Obviously, it can't come anywhere near matching the level of intensity that some of the stories in the book convey, but it's strange nonetheless. I read about this book last December and told my mother about it one day. And then a few weeks later, I was back in Florida for the holidays, and a surprise, I opened up one of my presents on Christmas morning and found she had gotten the book for me. I started to read it that very same night. The next day, I spent running errands around town with my girlfriend, and we pulled back up to my mom's house just after the sun had set. As we climbed out of the car, I happened to look up at the power lines running behind my mom's house, and there sat a tiny little screech owl. Sat motionless, staring straight into my mom's back window. We tried to tread lightly to not scare it away and just watched him for several minutes. Then we crept around to get a look at him from the front, and for a split second our view of him was obscured by some tall standing bamboo. As our view cleared again, he was gone. We never saw him fly off. He had just disappeared that quickly. Now, this is most likely just a coincidence, but I probably haven't seen an owl in the wild in at least a decade. But the day after I started reading a book about the owl and its connections to UFOs, aliens, and synchronicities, here I was catching a tiny owl staring intently into my mother's back window. Very wild stuff. I find owls to be absolutely fascinating. And this just adds a whole new layer to that for me. These animals have come to represent so much over the last few centuries. Knowledge, mystique, night itself. And now to add to the repertoire, alien encounters. Why not? The most common depictions of extraterrestrials are that of small gray humanoid creatures with huge black eyes that are its most prevalent feature on its giant, by comparison to its body, head. I know that was a mouthful. To make the leap to that of an owl, it's really not that far of one if you ask me. Although, I do think that a more likely explanation than an alien using a screen memory to keep humans calm would be that they're simply remembering or seeing in real time the owl instead, because that's how their brains are able to properly cope with the experience. Similar vein, but a more human nature explanation than supernatural. But if that's how they're keeping an eye on us, what happens when they actually interact with us? Well, straight from r/abductions over on Reddit, user KamiGothGirlfriend, fuck, I probably should just say KamiGothGF, whatever, same gist, shared that she believes that she and her boyfriend had been abducted. She even included pictures, so let's see what happened to them. I think my boyfriend and I were abducted last night. I've been having awful nightmares for 2 weeks now, and my boyfriend has been having nightmares too, which is very odd because he hardly dreams ever, much less has nightmares. Last night, though, my boyfriend fell asleep on the couch, and he is a heavy and mean sleeper. You can try and try, but if he falls asleep somewhere, you just have to accept that he's sleeping there. I tried my best to get him to come to bed, but eventually accepted my loss and got him a blanket and pillow. I slept alone. Before I fell asleep, I heard odd noises coming through the TV. I put on rain sounds on YouTube on my TV at night. Inside the sounds, I heard noises like an incomprehensible, oddly toned, robotic voice hidden behind the sounds of the rain. It was so faint, but I could hear it like a hidden broadcast. I shrugged it off as my own paranoia, as I've always had paranoia about silly things since I was a little kid. Feel free to ask. And just tried to go to sleep. Then I thought I heard the back door open, and only a few seconds later I heard popping sounds coming from seemingly the ceiling. I have a one-story house, so there's nothing up there but a roof and an empty attic. I had never heard popping sounds like that from the roof before. Then I heard my boyfriend on the couch in the living room make noise, and my paranoia kicked in. We live in a neighborhood watch area, and my first thought was, what if someone came in and got him while he was sleeping and now I'm next? So I got out of bed and looked into the living room, and he was sound asleep on the couch still. I went and checked the back door, and it was fully locked, nothing weird, so I went back to bed after attempting to wake up my boyfriend again, no avail. As I was falling asleep, I swear I heard more noises, but I fell asleep heavy and fast, which was odd because normally I have a hard time falling asleep. I woke up feeling nauseous and saw that my boyfriend was in the bed next to me. It wasn't until about 2 hours ago we went to take a shower and we noticed we had extremely painful red finger-like bruises on our right arms, but we did nothing that we can remember to get these bruises. He gets bruises all the time because he goes to jiu-jitsu, but he hasn't been in a week and a half. He said it looks like a bruise he'd only get after a very rough time rolling with someone big. I believe in aliens. I always have because of my childhood experiences and the experiences my dad has had throughout his life. So I jokingly said to him that we could have been abducted and that I read once that it can cause nightmares, and he looked at me funny. He then said, well, I was woken up by a horrible dream that I can't remember. That's how I got to bed. I jolted awake. I've never seen him do this, and he doesn't recall ever being startled awake before by a dream, so all of this is just sitting on me funny. Do you think we could have been abducted? Maybe just visited? I'll post my bruises below, but my boyfriend went to the gym, so he's not here for me to take a picture. But his looks extremely similar and is in the same spot. I don't know about you, but while I'm no stranger to mysterious bruises myself, ones of that severity don't just appear like that without having at least some idea of where they could have come from. When they're that deep, you certainly would remember an incident causing the pain that would be necessary to do that. Unless, of course, there's an underlying medical issue, but even then, you would be made aware of the cause once diagnosed. Given that OP hadn't shown any previous medical issues of this nature, I'm inclined to believe something otherworldly happened to them. On top of that, in the comment section, they commented that the bruises also felt like a sunburn to the touch. That's not normal. If I had to venture a guess, I'd say it almost sounds like radiation. But I'm not an expert, so none of y'all better quote me. Although that does bring us to our final story, and thus our next question. What makes these abduction stories so damn believable? I mean, most reported cases have no real substantial evidence. And to take people at their word is often a tough ask when it's anything even remotely unbelievable. In all fairness, humans have taken quite the time to learn a snake oil salesman from a real doctor, but even then, I can assure you, some still buy into the scam. But let me also reassure you that this next one is the most real story that I have heard. From allthat'sinteresting.com, here's a story of the Pascagoula alien story that saw 2 fishermen subjected to experimentation. It was October 11th, 1973, when Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson went fishing on the banks of Pascagoula River in Mississippi. At first, when Parker saw the blue lights reflected in the water, he thought police had come to instruct the two to leave. A big blue light came out of the clouds, Parker recalled. It was a blinding light. It was hard to tell with the light so bright, but it looked like it was shaped like a football. I would say, just estimating, it was about 80 foot. It made very little sound. It was just a hissing noise. Parker then claimed that 3 legless creatures floated out of the vessel toward him. He described all 3 as having mitten-shaped claws, while one was necklace and gray. The other appeared to be more feminine. When one of them tried to wrap its hands around Parker's neck, his natural response of fear oddly subsided. I think they injected us with something to calm us. I was kinda numb and went along with the program. Parker alleged that he and Hickson were taken aboard the alien vessel and experimented on. Afterward, the 2 terrified fishermen found themselves back on the riverbank as though nothing had happened. They drove to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and told Captain Glenn Ryder and Sheriff Fred Diamond of the entire story. When I got in there, they had me, Hickson told the police. There were no seats, no chain, they just moved me around. I couldn't resist them. I just floated, felt no sensation, no pain. They kept me in that position a little while, then they'd raise me back up. Hickson claimed that a machine resembling a giant eye looked over his entire body. He said he was surrounded by inhuman, 5-foot-tall, monopedal beings. Captain Ryder didn't believe the 2 men. He stepped out of the interrogation room, but left a secret recording device running in hopes of obtaining proof that their alien stories were fabricated. But what he later heard on this recording made him think twice. Jesus Christ, God have mercy. I thought I'd been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I've got to go through something like this, said Hickson to Parker. But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son. They had use. They could have done anything to us. I just want to cry right now, added Parker. What's so damn bad about it is nobody's gonna believe us. With no physical evidence of their abduction, the alien story remains a mystery. Parker stayed quiet about the event for decades, but after Hickson's death in 2011, he wrote a 2018 book on the matter. Its publication prompted others to come forward, claiming that they too had seen a UFO that night. It makes me feel pretty good that I'm not the only one who saw something, he said. Most of these people are credible people. Oh, and here's that recording, by the way.
Jesus Christ. You hear about something like that, but you can't believe it.
Yeah, you hear that, I know.
Where is something the United States can have up there?
No,
They wouldn't have done no
not what we see. Not what we see. It's something, and the Air Force and all know it's up there too, see. And this ain't gonna be the only time this gonna happen again.
She's on had a heart attack tonight, ain't she?
Well, I know.
And one down each
I know, it scared me to death too, something.
I'm just laying there crying right now. I can't tell.
I know that. So that, you can't get over it in a lifetime, you see. Jesus Christ.
I'm so damn bad about it, nobody believes. That's
And
what
I
I'm
thought I had been through enough of hell on this earth, and now I have to go through something like that, see. But they could have, I guess they could have harmed us, son. They could have done anything to us if they didn't hurt me.
Maybe why they just picked us?
I don't know. I'm telling you, man, I couldn't take much more than that.
I know you get to bed and get some nerve pills or something, see the doctor or something. I can't stand it. I'm about to go all to pieces.
I'll take you by when they get through us, we'll go by I'll get you something, settle you down with so you get some damn sleep.
I can't sleep tonight like it is. I'm just damn near crazy.
But Cal, when they brought you out of that damn thing, and when they brought me out, well, I like to know where the hell God damn, I like to know where the hell got you straightened out, man.
I didn't know it, though. I remember my heart, they just froze out just like that, and I couldn't move, just like I was stepping on a damn rattlesnake.
But they didn't do me that way, though.
I passed out. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life. You check the new medical records. It is. I've never seen nothing like that before in my life.
You can't make people believe that, though.
I don't know. Should you ever believe that? Because I
They better wake up and start believing.
Damn right.
They better wake up and start believing.
Damn right. Listen, I seen it. I can't figure out the damn door. You see how that door will come in on that side of the church?
Yeah, I don't know how to open, son. I don't know.
I didn't see no door swing.
I don't know how to open. I don't know how to
shit on it. All right, just see something like and look around and them damn blue lights and them son of bitches are just like that. They come out.
Yeah, I know. You can't believe it. You can't make people believe it.
I paralyzed right there. I couldn't
They
move.
won't believe it one of these days. They won't believe it one of these days. Might be too late.
I don't know about you, my dear little phantoms, but there's a fear in that voice that's beyond difficult to replicate. Like I said, of the stories that I read and listened to for this episode, this one was one of the ones that I'm having a hard time disbelieving. But tell me what you think. Do you believe his story after hearing that recording? Actually, before we part ways, I couldn't help but ask myself, wait, what even was the first abduction story? The entire time that I was doing research for tonight. While I couldn't really find a concrete answer, I was able to find an interesting excerpt that I'd just like to read for you all real quick. Freud's case study of Dr. Schreber and Freud's essay on Christoph Heisman's demonological neurist will illustrate the similarities between the stories of an abductee, a paranoid psychotic, and a man who claimed made a pact with the devil. In each of these stories, the subject created a projection of his repressed desire, and this projection took a form which the subject adopted from his culture. Such a comparison will attempt to show that paranoid psychosis, pagan mythology, and abduction narratives are all phases of the same psychological phenomenon. And that is the interpretation of this phenomenon which has changed over time rather than the phenomenon itself. The crucial similarity between pagan myths and abduction narratives is that their respective cultures encouraged belief in their projections of repressed desire, rather than their dissolution. All that fancy jargon really equates to is the popular idea that our societal culture has a strong effect on how mortals describe otherworldly happenings. Everyone has their own perception of reality, one that can be molded by the world that they live in, or rather, the time. Now, we are unfortunately to the end of this week's episode, speaking of time. As per always, if you have any scary stories you want me to read, you can tweet them at Misfortune4, send an email to luckymisfortune@gmail.com, that's LUCKYMS fortune@gmail, or reach out to me on any of my other socials linked in the description below. Now, as a casual reminder, once we reach 500 of you little phantoms, I will be sharing one of my own personal scary ghost stories. And trust me, you don't want to miss out. So, please subscribe, follow whatever the platform you're listening to on lets you do. And for those who are able to and want to support this project financially, there are also links to my Patreon, Ko-fi, and OnlyFans. Thank you all so much for tuning in this week to Phantasmic. I do hope you can sleep through those odd sounds coming from the next room. I know I wouldn't be able to do it. Good night. Mwah.